5002, 5003. Oh, hi there. After a 6-hour workout, there's nothing I like better than a good read. So welcome to Ellroy Reads, the show where I look at books that were highly influential to the writing and the career of James Ellroy. In today's show, we are looking at a wonderful novel called No Beast So Fierce by Edward Bunker. This is a hugely influential novel to James Ellroy, and the life of Edward Bunker somewhat parallels Ellroy's life. They knew each other. I'm going to be talking about that. So to start with, nice little post-workout refreshment now. So Edward Bunker was born in Los Angeles, and from an early age he was destined to get in trouble. His parents had a tumultuous marriage that ended in divorce. He ended up getting into trouble, ending up in reform school, and in the McKinley Boys' School, he met one of the proprietors of the institution, which was Louise Facenda, who had been a silent film actress and comedian. And she took sympathy on him, and she took him under her wing, and she paid for him to have writing lessons and things like that. So under her mentorship, Bunker's interest in writing really began. But he was still getting into a lot of trouble with the law, and he ended up being the youngest prisoner ever to be admitted to San Quentin at the age of 17, and he did 5 years there. But his interest in writing continued to grow. He was in a cell adjoining that of Carol Chessman, who you may remember, who pops up in a lot of James Ellroy's work. And Chessman at the time was writing various manuscripts, and Chessman encouraged his interest in writing. He read widely. Bunker read widely. Read the canon, Dostoevsky, prison writers. He also read the Bible, despite being a staunch atheist. And he said he would read it for bits of secular wisdom. And then, after he'd finished his stretch at San Quentin, he got out. He resumed his relationship with Louise Facenda, which was platonic, I should say. But that kind of came to a sour end because she suffered a nervous breakdown, and her husband, the film producer Hal Wallace, felt that Bunker was a bad influence and kind of banished him from her life. But he was dirt poor and getting experience, definitely, of the LA underworld and the LA lowlifes and how to survive when you have no money. He was selling his blood to pay for a correspondence writing course, and he ended up returning to prison when the police had booked his car, expecting it to lead them to a drug deal, but Bunker was actually driving to a bank heist. And led the police right there as it was happening. So he did another long stretch in prison, and it was in prison when his first book was published. This is his debut novel, No Beast So Fierce, and it was a sensation when it was published in 1973. So much so that when Bunker was released a couple of years later, he never returned to his criminal life. He later claimed that the criminal life was forced on him by circumstances that he couldn't escape. And once his circumstances had changed, because he left prison with a certain degree of fame, he could later build on that writing career, and he had no need for crime anymore. And overall, Bunker's writing career was pretty spectacular, perhaps not as prolific as it could have been. Only a handful of novels, but all very well received. As well as a screenwriting career. He wrote the screenplay for the film Runaway Train with John Voight. That was produced by Cannon and is often considered that production company's best film. And he had an acting career as well. He's most famous for playing Mr. Blue in Reservoir Dogs, and was a technical consultant on Michael Mann's Heat, and the character of Nate, played by John Voight, again from Runaway Train. The fence for all of the robberies that are taking place in Heat was based on Bunker. So, No Beast So Fierce follows, it is a first-person narration of Max Dembo, who's coming to the end of a long stretch. And he gets out, and the novel begins on the day he's released. So he gets out, and right away you see that his opportunities to go straight are very, very limited by the system itself. And Bunker's pretty clear here that the system is making criminals into worse criminals because just to survive they have to resort to crime. He has a very, very particular parole officer who, while not being a malicious man necessarily at first, the parole officer says, I've only got 13 cases. Most parole officers have like 70, but I handle 13 very dangerous criminals, which is what you are, Dembo. He challenges him for everything he does. He challenges him for his drinking, or if he wants to get a job, he says, you can't get a job there. There's too many drugs, it's too dangerous. You can't hang out at this particular location. There's too many criminals. Basically, you can't do this, you can't do that. And in a sense, he has a point, because the LA underworld is so numerous that it's really hard to escape that world, especially when you have no money. So what Dembo does is he's trying to go straight, and he says to the reader, I'm not going to lie to this guy, because lying to a parole officer will land you straight back in jail or prison, and that blows your next chance at parole. I could be looking at another 15 years without parole. To begin with, he tells the parole officer the truth, and then gradually that becomes more and more difficult. And when he finally becomes undone, the parole officer visits him in his very run-down apartment, more of a shack, and he sees three fused together matches in an ashtray, which he knows have been created to cook heroin. But it wasn't actually Dembo who was taking the heroin or cooking it, it was an associate of his. Because whenever you're around criminals, they've got something going on, and Dembo's going to get dragged into it. So there's a very, very violent break with the parole officer without giving too much away. And then when that happens, Dembo is a marked man. And subsequently, all of his escapades are efforts to get money, to survive, or even live the good life, because these criminals are not building themselves a nest egg with these ill-gotten gains. They're going, loot is immediately squandered on clothes or something, flashy clothes or jewelry or something worthless. And essentially it becomes a question of when Dembo will get caught, not if, but there is one pretty spectacular twist to it. So the first person narration is very powerful, it's bleak and uncompromising, it sets a very pessimistic and nihilistic portrayal of the system, not just the institutions, just both in prison and out of prison, the parole system, but also the streets of LA. Everywhere there's a bar, there's a hustler, there's a bookie, there's an armed robber, there's a fence or something, and everything Dembo does is high risk, because he can talk to a fence and set a deal up with him, but he's got to worry if the guy is a snitch. He can go to a bookie, but he's got to worry if the guy has a drug problem. Everywhere, someone can let him down, and it only has to be one mistake. It's not even a mistake he makes, and he's right back in prison. The depiction of prison, again, is grim. It's the time of the race wars, which kicked off in US prisons after World War II. Dembo's pretty kind of like, he's pretty honest that he's had this sex with men in prison. He describes it as either sex with pretty boys or feminine men. He doesn't comment whether these relationships, if you can call them that, were consensual or not. When he gets out of prison, right away he's after a woman. He hasn't had a woman in years, and that forms a strong part of the plot. So Ellroy's connection is in one sense literal, because he knew Bunker, and I spoke to him about Bunker a fair bit. When this book came out, it was not only it was a literary sensation, but unlike a lot of successful genre books today, it was almost like a high literary sensation. Bunker became very good friends with William Styron, who was one of America's most leading literary figures, and Styron championed Bunker's work, and he became a figure who was Bunker was a genuine tough guy. You only had to listen to him speak to see that it wasn't an act, that he knew his stuff. But like, what is the crime novel if it's not a social novel? And Bunker had the chops for that. Today, most successful genre novels tend to be published written by people who are just enthusiasts for the genre. Now, they may have been journalists or they may have been academics. They've usually got some sort of background, be it in writing or something else. But there aren't many great prison writers today. There aren't many great tough guy writers. Now, Ellroy was very good friends with Darrell Lawson, an actor who's still around and has acted in a fair few good productions, including the wonderful crime film Mike's Murder, starring Deborah Winger. That's one of the all-time great, like neo-noir films. And Darrell Lawson was William Styron's son-in-law, and Lawson was also good friends with Bunker, as was Styron. Ellroy was friends with Lawson, and that's how that kind of circle kind of created itself. Um, when I spoke to Ellroy about Bunker, he didn't look back on the friendship with Bunker that fondly, I have to admit. They shared an agent in Nat Sobel for a while, one of the all-time great agents, and I think he felt that Bunker became very lazy, and that he was writing his memoirs and he was writing novels, and they were full of anachronisms and they were full of things that didn't fit the period. And Sobel was pushing very much for changes to be made and edits to be made, and Bunker just really wasn't doing it. He'd fallen in with other interests, and he also had a pretty serious marijuana habit. And Ellroy described, driving. Bunker would be driving him around LA, and he'd have some spliff um, while he was on the road. And I think Ellroy, of course, a recovering addict himself, didn't take kindly to that sort of behaviour. So I think the friendship cooled, shall we say, but this novel Ellroy maintained his admiration for. He also liked some of Bunker's subsequent novels, like Dog Eat Dog and Little Boy Blue. They're all very, very readable. Um, but this novel, it gets you on the streets of LA. It gets you into the communities and the bars, the flea pit bars. It's very realistic in terms of like what you've got to do to get a meal, to survive, to get some money to get from day to day. What have you got to do to set up a job? To rob a liquor store that might just net you $150 if you're lucky. How long is that going to last? What are the risks involved along the way? And Ellroy, like Bunker, was a born and bred Angelino. He knew a lot about that stuff. But I suppose the parallels between Ellroy and Bunker, although numerous, they're both from broken homes. They're both, did some time in young boys' institutions. But they're also a bit more muted in terms of, Bunker did time in San Quentin prison, which pops up a lot in Ellroy's work, whereas Ellroy did time in Los Angeles County Jail. And Ellroy was very honest about that in terms of, like, he would say, I was not cut out to survive prison. There's a distinction between prison and jail that doesn't always translate to a lot of his continental European readers in France and Italy, where he's huge. But I couldn't survive prison with the rape and the race wars and the arson and all of the other horrible torture and stuff that goes on in prison. Bunker did. He was a serious armed robber and a serious criminal, whereas Ellroy was doing time for petty crimes. But they're both remarkable men, and although I won't call Ellroy a prison writer, certainly his story of redemption is up there with Bunker's. It's they both turned their work around, turned their lives around and produced incredible work as a writer. And once their writing career got going, they they never had trouble with the law again. They might have had other kind of chaotic things going on in their personal lives. They may have had the odd relapse, but they never had trouble with the law again. I will say probably Ellroy is now a bigger figure than Bunker is. But again, there are many parallels. I mean, for instance, from an early age, Bunker had developed this friendship with Louise Facenda, and that seems to be one of those stories that's very, very indicative how in LA you can be rubbing up against the criminal underworld and you can be rubbing up against Hollywood, sometimes in the same day. And Ellroy, from a child, had that um, same relationship in that his father was Rita Hayworth's business manager. His father would tell him some of the stories of old Hollywood about Mickey Rooney and some of the stars of the Golden Age, and obviously the sex and scandals that kind of lay behind all of that world. So, No Be So Fierce. It is a marvelous novel. It's one Alway described it as probably the best novel of the LA Underworld ever written, and I have to agree with him, because the LA Underworld, the way Alroy's portrayed and the way Bunker's portrayed, it's very different from, say, New York and Chicago, where the Underworld's really about the mafia families or the organized crime groups that gather around kind of ethnic groups. In LA, this is a world of hustlers, pimps, buckies, armed robbers, all very, very loosely joined together, all in one sense just chasing their own dream in the way that many straight people move to LA and chase the dream, the Hollywood dream. And this, believe me, this is just as futile, obviously more futile, but very, very, brilliantly and compellingly portrayed. And interestingly enough, there was a film adaptation of this because Dustin Hoffman bought the rights almost right away. And the film was called Straight Time, and it was released in 1978. And Edward Brooke had a role in the film. And I'm happy to report that it's really, really good, because a lot of the film adaptations of books I've covered on this show tend not to be that great. I'd say even From Here to Eternity, which we covered in an earlier episode, which won Best Picture, isn't that great. It certainly doesn't hold up very well today. But Straight Time is a marvelous crime film, one of the all-time great 1970s American crime films, and that's saying something. And Dustin Hoffman is fantastic in the lead role as the criminal, and Emmett Walsh plays the parole officer. Walsh died just this year, and it's one of his best roles, and he was in many great films, including great crime films like Blood Simple. And interestingly enough, it was directed by Ulu Grossbard. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. Who also directed the film adaptation of True Confessions, which we've covered on an earlier episode. So I would check out No Be So Fierce. It's from, the title is taken from a Shakespeare quote from Richard III. Like I say, Bunker was that rare beast, if you pardon the expression, where he was both a literary figure and also a fantastic crime writer. He moved in literary circles and Hollywood circles, but he never dropped the tough guy act. Maybe towards the end of his life, he was getting a little bit lazy, and he's dropped out of fashion a little bit since he died. He died at the age of 71. Too young, but I think his contribution to the genre is magnificent. And when this book was released, I don't know exactly when Ellroy read this book, but if he read it when it was released, which was 1973, you can imagine the effect it may have had on him, in that those were Ellroy's very, very low years. And when he was on the streets, he was committing petty crimes. He was ending up in jail. And then he would get out. He'd have to get money somehow. He was selling blood, just like Bunker did, just to survive, just to buy a meal. And you can imagine the effect it had on him, not just as a very, very accurate depiction of LA, but also the effect that Bunker's story had on him. Is this like, this guy can make it, and this guy's been to San Quentin. If he can make it as a writer, I can make it. So that's my Ellroy Reid recommendation for this week. No Be So Fierce. Go out, get yourself a copy. It was the launch of an extraordinary writing career. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Ellroy Reads. Bye-bye.